The rhythm of life, the only thing standing between this man and the end. "Get her out of here," someone shouted, but Dr. Morrison overruled them. "She stays. We need all hands." Emma worked until her arms burned and sweat dripped into her eyes. She worked through the chaos of other nurses running in with equipment, through the sound of the defibrillator charging, through the moment when Dr. Morrison called clear and the patient's body arched off the table. She worked through the second shock and the third, through the medication pushes and the desperate attempts to restart a heart that refused to beat. And then, after 7 minutes and 43 seconds that felt like hours, the monitor beeped. Once, twice, a rhythm, weak irregular, but there. "We've got sinus rhythm," Dr. Morrison said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "Good work, people. Let's get him stabilized." Emma stepped back, her hands trembling, and that's when she realized the man in the suit was still there, still watching her with cold fury in his eyes. But the patient was alive. That was all that mattered. The patient was alive. She'd been so naive. The investigation had taken 3 hours. Emma sat in a windowless office while hospital administrators and military personnel asked her the same questions over and over. Did she know the patient was classified? Did she understand that unauthorized contact with a protected individual was a security breach? Did she comprehend the liability she'd created for the hospital? "I was trying to save his life," Emma kept saying, but nobody seemed to hear her. "You violated protocol," they said. "You created an international incident. You touched a person under active Secret Service protection without clearance. He was dying. That's not the point. Except it was the point. It was the only point." But Emma was just a rookie nurse barely out of school, and her opinion didn't matter when lawyers and administrators and men with badges were in the room. They'd fired her as a liability. To protect the hospital from potential lawsuits, from bad publicity, from the consequences of having a nurse who put saving lives above following orders. It was cleaner this way, they explained. Simpler. She'd find another job. There were always positions for nurses willing to work night shifts in understaffed hospitals. But Emma knew the truth. She'd been blacklisted. The termination was for cause, which meant every hospital in the region would see it on her record, which meant she'd spent 4 years and $60,000 on a degree she could no longer use. The days after the firing blurred together in a haze of rejection emails and mounting panic. Emma applied to every hospital within 100 miles, and every single one sent the same polite rejection. It took a job waiting tables at a diner near her apartment, working doubles to make rent, coming home with her feet aching and grease in her hair, and the bitter knowledge that this was her life now. Her mother called every day. "Any luck with the applications, sweetie?" "Not yet," Emma would say, because she couldn't bear to admit the truth, couldn't bear to see the disappointment in her mother's eyes when she explained that saving a man's life had cost her everything. Her little brother Danny knew something was wrong. He was 16, too smart for his own good, and he cornered her one night when she came home from the diner. "Why aren't you at the hospital anymore?" he asked. Emma tried to smile. "Just needed a change." "You're lying." Danny's voice was quiet, serious in a way that made him seem older than his years. "You loved that job. You talked about it every day." "What happened?" She broke down then, the whole story spilling out between sobs. Whoa. Danny listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he wrapped his arms around her and held on tight. "You did the right thing," he said fiercely. "I don't care what they say. You saved someone's life. That matters. It doesn't feel like it matters. It will, I promise." Emma wanted to believe him, but believing required hope, and hope was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. 6 weeks after the firing, Emma was working the lunch shift at the diner when a man in a military dress uniform walked in. She noticed him immediately. Everyone did. The uniform was impressive, decorated with medals and insignia that suggested rank and importance. He was older, maybe 60, with steel gray hair and the kind of bearing that said he'd spent his life giving orders and expecting them to be followed. He sat in Emma's section. She approached with her order pad and her best customer service smile, trying not to think about how strange it felt to be taking meal orders when she should have been checking vitals and administering medications. "What can I get for you?" she asked. The man looked up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Recognition. He knew her. "Emma Walsh?" he said. Her stomach dropped. "Yes, I'm General Robert Crawford." I need to speak with you about the patient you treated 6 weeks ago at Metropolitan General. The order pad slipped from Emma's fingers. Her manager was going to kill her for taking a break during the rush, but she couldn't think about that now. She led General Crawford to a booth in the back corner, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I don't understand," she managed. "I can't talk about patients. Privacy laws." "The patient was Secretary of Defense Thomas Brennan," General Crawford said quietly. "And I'm here because he asked me to find you." The world seemed to tilt. Emma gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "The Secretary of Defense? He was at a classified briefing when he had a massive coronary event. We got him to the nearest hospital, which happened to be yours." The general's eyes were intense, focused. The Secret Service had orders to limit access to cleared personnel only. Those orders nearly killed him. "I didn't know who he was," Emma whispered. "I just saw someone dying. I know. I've read the incident report. I've reviewed the security footage. I've spoken to Dr. Morrison and every other person in that room." General Crawford leaned forward. "Emma, if you hadn't pushed past my agents, if you hadn't started compressions when you did, Secretary Brennan would be dead. The medical team estimates you bought him the critical 90 seconds that made the difference between survival and brain death." Emma couldn't speak, couldn't process. The man she'd saved was the Secretary of Defense, the most important civilian leader in the military, and she'd been fired for it. "The hospital told me I violated protocol," she said, her voice breaking. "They said I created a liability. They fired me." The general's expression hardened. "I know, and that's the other reason I'm here." Secretary Brennan spent 3 weeks in recovery. He's back to work now, full duty, because of what you did. When he found out you'd been terminated, he was... The general paused, choosing his words carefully. He was extremely displeased. "It doesn't matter," Emma said dully. "I can't get hired anywhere. My record is flagged. It's over." "Actually," General Crawford said, "that's what I need to talk to you about." This morning, the Pentagon called Metropolitan General Hospital. Secretary Brennan wanted to understand why a nurse who saved his life was punished for it. He wanted to know what protocols were more important than human life. What'd they say? They said it was a personnel matter, that they had to protect the hospital from liability, that you'd been clearly informed of the consequences. The general's voice was hard now, angry. So Secretary Brennan asked the Pentagon's legal team to review the case. Turns out, firing someone for providing emergency medical care to a patient in cardiac arrest is actually illegal. It's called wrongful termination. And when that patient is a federal official and the firing was based on security protocols that contradicted medical necessity, it becomes a federal matter. Emma's head was spinning. "I don't understand what you're saying." "I'm saying that Metropolitan General is currently being investigated by 3 different federal agencies. I'm saying their insurance carrier has been notified of potential violations. I'm saying the hospital administrator who signed your termination letter has been placed on administrative leave." General Crawford pulled an envelope from his jacket. "And I'm saying that Secretary Brennan would very much like to meet the woman who saved his life." The envelope contained a plane ticket to Washington, D.C., a hotel reservation, and a handwritten note on official Department of Defense stationery. "Miss Walsh, I owe you my life. Please allow me to say thank you in person. Thomas Brennan." Emma stared at the note until the words blurred. "This is really happening? It's really happening?" "The flight is tomorrow morning, if you're willing." Emma's voice failed. She tried again. "I don't know what to say." "Come to Washington, let the man whose life you saved thank you properly." The general stood preparing to leave, and "Emma, bring your nursing license. Secretary Brennan has some people he'd like you to meet." That night, Emma called her mother and told her everything. She expected shock, maybe disbelief, but her mother just laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. "I knew it," her mother said. "I knew you did the right thing. I knew it would matter, Rio." "Fine." Danny got on the phone, whooping with excitement. "I told you. Didn't I tell you?" Emma packed a bag with shaking hands, barely sleeping, still half convinced this was some kind of elaborate dream. But the next morning, the plane ticket was real. The flight was real. The car that picked her up at the airport was real, driven by a military aide who treated her with a respect that felt surreal after weeks of being nobody. The Pentagon was enormous, overwhelming, a maze of corridors and security checkpoints. Emma followed her escort through layers of clearance, her heart hammering, until they reached an office suite marked Secretary of Defense. Thomas Brennan stood when she entered. He was exactly as she remembered from that chaotic morning in the ICU, tall, distinguished, with gray hair and the kind of presence that filled a room. But he was alive, healthy, standing on his own 2 feet instead of lying on a hospital bed with a flat line on the monitor. "Miss Walsh," he said, and crossed the room to shake her hand. His grip was firm, warm. "Thank you for coming. I've been trying to find you for weeks." "General Crawford found me," Emma said, her voice barely steady. "So I heard, working at a diner." Brennan's expression was pained, steen. "When I found out what happened to you, what they did to you after you saved my life, I was ashamed of the hospital that failed you, ashamed of the system that punished you for doing exactly what you were trained to do." "You don't need to apologize," Emma said. "I was just doing my job." No, kick. "You were doing more than your job. You were fighting for my life when people who should have been helping you were trying to stop you." Brennan gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. I want to tell you what's been happening." Over the next hour, the Secretary of Defense explained how the federal investigation had unfolded. Metropolitan General Hospital was facing multiple violations: wrongful termination, interference with medical care, potential criminal negligence for prioritizing security over a patient's life. The hospital's lawyers were scrambling to settle before the case became public. "They want to offer you reinstatement," Brennan said. "Full back pay, expungement of your record, a formal apology." Emma thought about the administrator who'd fired her, about the cold indifference in his eyes. She wore her grandmother's stethoscope and the same scrubs she'd worn that morning in the ICU because they reminded her why she'd become a nurse in the first place. Not for the paycheck or the prestige, not for the gratitude or recognition, but for the moments when everything hung in the balance and someone needed her to fight. The chief of nursing met her personally, shook her hand and said, "We're honored to have you here, Emma. Secretary Brennan told us what you did." That took real courage, Joan. "I was just doing my job," Emma said, the same words she'd used before. But this time, the chief of nursing smiled. "That's exactly the attitude we need here. Come on, let me show you your unit." As Emma followed her through the gleaming corridors of Walter Reed, past rooms full of service members who'd given everything for their country, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose, hope, the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. That night, she texted Secretary Brennan, "First day complete. Thank you for believing in me." His response came quickly, "Thank you for saving my life. Now go save many more." Emma set her phone down and looked around her small apartment, the same space that had felt like a prison during those dark weeks of unemployment. It looked different now. Not because anything had changed physically, but because she had changed. She'd been broken down, stripped of her identity, forced to confront the possibility that doing the right thing might cost her everything. And she discovered something powerful, that the right thing was worth it anyway. That saving a life mattered more than protocol or politics or protecting institutions from liability. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was pushing forward despite. 6 months later, Emma was working a night shift when a trauma case came in. A young Marine, critically injured, his heart stopping on the table. Emma didn't hesitate. She started compressions, called orders, fought with everything she had. And when his heart started beating again, when his eyes opened and he gasped for air, she felt the same fierce joy she'd felt that morning with Secretary Brennan. This was why she'd become a nurse. Not for the easy days or the gratitude or the moments when everything went according to plan. But for this, the desperate fight against death, the refusal to give up, the absolute conviction that every life mattered. The young Marine survived. He went home to his family, went back to his life, probably never knowing how close he'd come to dying. But Emma knew. And that knowledge, that certainty that her work mattered, carried her through the hard shifts and the impossible cases and the moments when exhaustion made her question everything. A year after her firing, Emma received a letter from Metropolitan General Hospital. They were offering her reinstatement again with a promotion and a significant raise. The hospital had been restructured, they said. New leadership, new protocols that prioritized patient care over liability concerns. Emma read the letter once, then filed it away without responding. She didn't need Metropolitan General anymore. She'd found where she belonged, in a place that valued courage over compliance, that understood the difference between following orders and saving lives. She still had the termination letter tucked away in a drawer with a plane ticket to D.C. and Secretary Brennan's handwritten note. Reminders of the worst and best moments of her nursing career, of how close she'd come to losing everything and how Grace had found her anyway. Sometimes she thought about the security guard who'd escorted her out that terrible morning, about the administrator who'd signed the termination letter, about all the people who'd watched her lose her job and done nothing. She'd been angry at them for a long time. But the anger had faded, replaced by something closer to pity. They'd chosen fear over courage, liability over life, and in doing so, they'd lost something precious, the knowledge that they'd made a difference, that their work mattered beyond paychecks and protocols. Emma had that knowledge. She carried it with her every day, in every patient she treated, in every life she fought to save. She'd been fired for touching a military VIP, for breaking protocol, for choosing a patient's life over institutional safety, and she'd do it again in a heartbeat, because that's what nurses did. They showed up. They fought. They refused to let death win, even when the odds were impossible and the cost was high. Emma Walsh had learned that lesson the hardest way possible, but she'd learned it, and that made all the difference.